Thank you. Yay. I'm a bit embarrassed to start this sermon, actually, because I didn't know Benoit was coming, or Jackie. So I was thinking of Angèle, as I now know she is, because the start of this is about my French. So I have a quiz. I have a quiz for the Francophones, and there is a real link to the sermon with this, which you'll see. I know. Well, that's why I'm very nervous and worried. So I hope I wrote it down. Je ferai. Which one was the conditional and which one was the future?
You said them the same.
Exactly.
They're not pronounced the same for real.
Well, for me, it's close enough, honestly. But you see, I do struggle with French. I mean, it's good because I live my life in the moment, because I have no future tense and no past tense, so I have no choice but to live in the present. I have actually started taking lessons, except I've managed to be in Orlando in workshops, in meetings, and this, that, and the other. So I just have the online stuff, which I've been very bad about doing. And I do struggle with conjugation, with grammar, with vocabulary, with listening, with speaking, well, I suppose with everything, really, truthfully. Anyway, enough of the mysteries of French. I'll come back to that in a minute. Did I read the Gospel? I never read the Gospel.
No, you didn't.
Would you like to?
I need, not only would I like to, I need to, otherwise the sermon will make no sense to you.
You don't mind? We're ready.
Please stand for the Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ from 2 weeks ago, according to Luke.
Glory to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost." The Gospel of Christ.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Now you can sit down for the start of the talk, which I will not repeat, even though you've had it. So it was, this is one of the better known stories in the Bible, as you know. You were listening, right? You remember what it was. So Zacchaeus, he's small, and we all know small people are really bossy. Daniel's not here, so I can say that in total safety. He won't throw something at me. And he's a tax collector, and we all know tax collectors in the Bible are rich criminals, steal from people, take from the poor, take from beyond. And actually this guy is even worse than that. He is the chief tax collector. That means the tax collectors work for him, and they kind of come to him. And so we know he's a bad man. This is clear. And actually the way it worked is he had to collect the taxes for Rome, because I guess they found it better to send the locals round to collect the taxes. He gave what he had to Rome, but then the deal was whatever he wanted to kind of cream off on top, providing he paid to Rome what Rome wanted, all was okay at that point. And he's short. He's very short. So when Jesus comes to town, he can't see what's going on. And I guess being the tax collector of the town, he didn't feel totally inclined to say, "Hey, excuse me, do you mind if I kind of come to the front? I'm not very tall, I'd really like to see what's going on here." I guess he would have had things thrown at him or something. So Jesus, so as you know, he goes and climbs a sycamore tree. I'm not sure why the breed of tree is important. Perhaps Walter can tell me that afterwards. Anyway, he climbs the tree. Jesus comes by. Jesus sees him up there, sees something in him, whatever that is, and said, "Hey, Zacchaeus, I want to come to your house." Zacchaeus immediately invites him in and says, basically, "Thank goodness you're here, Lord. I'll give half of my money to the poor and pay back everyone I've defrauded 4 times as much as I stole from them." Fantastic. Salvation has come to this house. A sinner saved. He saw Jesus. He repented. He's now a good man forever. Case closed. That's it. The end of story. Does anything strike you about that is just too easy to be true? Since when has Jesus been okay with, oh, sorry, God, I got it all wrong. I'll make it good. And there we go. That's it. Fantastic. Soul saved. There's nothing about sinning no more. There's nothing about changing path. There's nothing even really about Zacchaeus inviting Jesus in. Like, Jesus just imposes himself on something. He never does that anywhere else. He doesn't push in. And then this giving half your money to the poor and then giving 4 times of everything you've defrauded when you spent your whole life defrauding people. That doesn't sound like it makes mathematical sense to me either, never mind any other sort of sense. So going back to my French, there's actually some scholarly debate about the tense of this, and this is why it's important, whether it's the conditional or the future. See, I need to know these things. So in the way that I kind of read it, because I kind of set it up, it's, oh yeah, I will give back. The other, let me give you a different telling of this story. Some of the edits and additions are my own and added for colour, but actually a lot of the edits and additions in the original telling of the story, which is the traditional one, which you'll find in a million places on the web and a million sermons, actually a lot of those are additions for colour as well, so I think it's fair, personally. So, let me start again. There's a man called Zacchaeus. He's pretty small, actually, he's a small guy. So at school, he can't play soccer. He's not on the first team. When they play David and Goliath or the Israelites against the Philistines, he's always kind of consigned to the side of the Philistines, where he's not as Goliath, obviously, because that would need to be someone tall, but he's consigned to the Philistines. So he's not he's not one of the in kids. He's not one of the guys who is in the in crowd. Although he is quite smart, he's good at understanding facts and figures, and actually he's pretty good at the Jewish law as well. He kind of knows what he's about. He can remember the Bible. He knows his stuff. So then he leaves school, and when it comes to getting a job, well, because he's short and not super strong, he's not exactly the first choice for guarding sheep and seeing off the wolves. He's not the first man in the queue when you want somebody to go and build your house or dig your field or even pick your grapes, because you have to carry them home again, He's not from a family that's rich, so they can't afford to pay the Pharisees to teach him to be a teacher of the law and a priest, as it were. But his family needs the money, so eventually he decides he's going to become a tax collector, because after all, he's got a good head for facts and figures. But actually, he knows the law pretty well. He's learned his stuff, like all good boys do in those days. And the Romans like him, actually, because he's pretty good at his job. He gets the money for them. And because he's actually quite honest, he takes a bit of extra for himself because he needs to live, and he gets comfortably off because he's a sound investor and all that. But because he actually doesn't mess about too much with the poor folks, actually there's not too much rebellion around Jericho. People kind of get on with life, and on he goes. Anyway, so he goes on his tax collecting mission, and bit by bit, probably his the few friends he had from school, maybe he doesn't get invited to dinner quite as much. Maybe he's not quite as popular in the synagogue as he used to be, because he's not exactly Mr. Popular, as we know. Anyway, but he doesn't mind that too much, because in his heart he knows what's the right thing. He knows he's right with God. He knows what the law is. So he prays. He observes the rules. He knows God. Perhaps he tries a bit to get some understanding with his friends and to say, no, I'm not like those other tax collectors. This is how I do it. I need to live, so I take a bit, but probably doesn't work out too well. And maybe he starts getting mad about it, then realizes there's no chance, no point in doing that. Perhaps he comes to the conclusion that it doesn't really matter what they think, that in the end it's between him and God, and perhaps hopefully he has a few good friends around and a nice family who support him and mesh him. Let's say he has, for the sake of the story. So when Jesus comes, he's heard a bit about this teacher, and this teacher is known to be different. He's had a bit of a go at the Pharisees about maybe they shouldn't charge so much for their lessons, maybe they shouldn't abuse their power. Maybe they're not really being the right people to teach, or they're not teaching in the right way. So when Jesus comes, he actually does want to go and see who this guy is. But he does know that the chances of him going to Jericho Main Square and being allowed to go to the front to see are actually not very good. So he goes and he finds his tree. And then the rest we know. Jesus comes by and he does invite himself into Zacchaeus' house. And Zacchaeus does invite him in. And then when they're talking, Jesus says, well, how does it go being a tax collector? And he says, well, it's not the world's greatest job, truly, Jesus. But what I do is I follow exactly what it says in Leviticus, that I give half of my money to the poor, and I take the most extreme cause, which if by accident or deliberately I've wronged somebody, I pay back 4 times as much, because that's what it says I should do. That's what I do, and that's how I live with myself doing this job, and so they carry on. And then Jesus, so it isn't a future thing. Oh yeah, I will go and do that now I've seen you. This is how I'm living my life today. And Jesus said, here is a true son of Abraham, and salvation has come to this house. He recognizes that. So which story do you pick from that? Well, I kind of leave it to you, really. I have no ability to tell you which is the future and which is the conditional and which is the present tense in French, never mind in ancient Greek or Hebrew or whatever it's written in. What I do know, though, is that the second one makes more sense to me. So all the way through Luke, Jesus has been saying, hey, these Pharisees, these clergy, they're charging too much. You think they should be good because that's the role they've got, but yet they charge you too much. They abuse their power, blah, blah, blah. All the stuff we've been having ever since Trinity Sunday. In fact, I think it's been Luke all the way since the summer. That they're all about the money. They're all about their status. They're all about being, having the long tassels and sitting in the nice places and about themselves. They're not trustworthy teachers. Invert that. Here's a man who should be bad. He's the tax collector. They're well known to be the bottom of the pile, and yet actually, despite the fact he gets no praise from his friends or from the synagogue, he's not held up in high places. I'm sure he does not get the posh seat at the weddings. He's doing what I want, which is following the law and knowing God. That seems to make a lot more sense to me than a form of evangelism, which is you see Jesus, you throw everything away, and you suddenly realize the error of your ways because someone came to dinner. And I wonder if too much of our evangelistic thought is based on the Zacchaeus story, actually, that if only we could just get Jesus to see someone, they'll suddenly see all of the error of their ways overnight, and they'll see that they were a sinner, and they'll see what's going on and give up. That Jesus is never what we expect, and in general, Jesus doesn't really tell people, please go do this. He invites them, he lets them come to him, and he lets them see, and then things unfold as they unfold. The second thing, Jesus didn't take things on face value. Like, the whole story is on this setup that, it puts it loud and clear at the start. He's rich and he's a tax collector. It's set up to put that assumption in your head. But looking deeper, understanding deeper, being prepared to entertain other possibilities, seeing what's really going on, that feels much more to me like what has been happening through the gospel. And maybe it says also that Jesus really does approve of and recognize those who quietly do the right thing, don't seek the glory, don't do it for the wrong reasons, for themselves, for whatever else, but those who just work, go home, look after their families, follow the law, pray. There's a real commendment for that in this gospel. And that being and saying the same thing as far as we are able is important. That's the message of the rest of Luke. And maybe the final thing, which I'm going to pick up on next week, I think, is all of Jesus' miracles are unblocking, or encounters, if you like. All of them are trying to unblock a barrier between someone and God. And in this case, the barrier, I guess, is that this person probably isn't even particularly welcome to go worship because of who he is and the job that because of the job he does, actually, not because of who he is. And I find myself more and more really wondering, what are the blockages that us being a Christian institution, if you like, with all the history that goes with that back a really long way, I do find myself wondering what blockages that puts between us or between people, including us, and worshipping God. And maybe I'll pick up that more next week. But I think we have to entertain the idea that, rightly or wrongly, this is a place where many people would associate more with Pharisees than with Jesus. And that is a blocker. And I'm influenced a bit by a post that Ryan Cook, if you remember the chap who was vicar of Bow Repair until a few weeks ago. For those who don't know, he moved out west. He's pretty much going it freelance. He's working in, I think it's downtown East Vancouver, the really challenged bit of Vancouver. He's basically walking the streets and talking to people. That's his ministry at the moment. And he too is wrestling with, how can I, a 6'2" white male person from a church background, how can I minister to people who've been super damaged by what the church has done, by what white people 6'2" have done to them over many generations? And he's wrestling with that question, and I think it's a good question for us all to wrestle with as we consider Zacchaeus and everything else. That and of course we can't change everyone's perception overnight. We have to kind of live with that perception by being the best we can, living out our faith as best we can. And I think that's probably where I leave it today. That, and of course, an exhortation to learn your conjugation, because it's really important.
Amen.
Amen.